As product management professionals, one of our most common tasks is to engage with customers and end users. It's absolutely critical to hear the voice of the customer in order to build products that our users love. As some of us know, that can be a unique challenge in a B2B or business-to-business environment. If you've ever Googled how to engage with end users, you'll get a host of results suggesting things like make sure you're on all the social media outlets and create a tag your friend contest or ask your users for reviews. At Medidata, we build software that powers clinical trials and makes them more efficient. Our customers are some of the most eminent drug and medical device development companies in the world. This means that as a product manager at Medidata, I'm operating in that B2B environment, where I'm interfacing with customer stakeholders primarily at the director level. Now, the key challenge here becomes, how do we get through to the end user in this environment? It's their thought that counts primarily, and it can be easily obscured in this type of environment. The end users of my product utilize the software in their day-to-day jobs, so they can't write a review on the App Store. They don't get a chance to chat with a customer service advisor. For the product managers out there in this situation, we know that tagging friends on social media is not going to cut it. There can be many ways to find the voice of the end user. However, today I wanted to share with you some of the ways that you can achieve that specifically in the B2B scenario, and one way in particular that I've found success with. To start off with, I wanted to provide a little bit of background on Medidata. Medidata's mission is to power smarter treatments and healthier people. We're a technology company that develops and markets software as a service for clinical trials. The clinical trial industry is heavily regulated, and rightly so. Medidata provides software to drug development companies who must provide sufficient evidence to regulatory bodies in their country to prove that the drug or device is effective and that it was trialed correctly. This puts Medidata in the spotlight. Because our customers are regulated, we are too. We're bound to prove that our software meets regulatory guidelines, and we're subject to an audit of this at any time. To add to this, each company has their own SOPs, standard operating procedures, each of which can have their own interpretation of these guidelines. So you can start to see why this becomes complex very quickly. Now, it's not just the clinical trial industry that faces these types of challenges. Some examples of other regulated industries that come to mind include the medical industry, government bodies, finance and banking, as well as aviation. So all of these industries will also face similar challenges to what I've described. And that's fundamentally because we're dealing with people's lives, which is a very rewarding responsibility, but it means that we're much more constrained, that there's always that additional layer of caution. Because there's so much at stake, the buying process can be detailed too. In the clinical trial industry, buying decisions in terms of who at a company selects which software they procure is usually made by the director level and above. And these are staff members who typically have been part of the clinical trial industry for a long time, but critically, these are the people who will not be using the software themselves. Now, it's often these same staff members who are also responsible for managing the software implementation and working with Medidata. So having an interface with the customer at this level is of course useful. However, at the end of the day, these are not the end users of your product. To give you an example of this, I was chatting recently with a friend of mine, an ex-colleague and product manager in the clinical trial space as well. He told me about some A/B testing that he did with a group of end users on a document storage system. He had a small sample group where half the users had one UI and the other half had a different UI. Now, it wasn't long before he had a phone call from the director managing these users that there's been some kind of mistake, asking why on earth the system looked different for different people, and please can it be changed so that everyone learns the same system so that there's no confusion. Now, I think that this anecdote really brings home the reticence of regulated industries and the challenges that the product professionals can face when working with these types of customers. For all of these reasons, it can be difficult to find the voices of our end users. I've worked in a range of business analysis and product management roles for various regulated companies where I've faced these kinds of challenges. In that time, I've tried various methods and approaches to find my end user. Spoiler alert here, not all of them have been so successful. But I wanted to talk through today what the options are, as well as what has worked and why. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with a range of ways to work with customers. I've got a list here of the most commonly used ways in B2B settings, but this list is by no means exhaustive. So we have focus groups with individual customers. This involves having focus sessions with various representatives, all from the same customer. This is a very common approach and sometimes necessary if you have a specific customer who requires additional attention due to things like, for example, the size of their contract, or if they're particularly unhappy with the product for, whatever reason. And this method usually involves the product manager presenting on a certain topic and allowing discussion and feedback from the customer. This can come with some great direct feedback. However, it is going to be limited to the views of that specific organization. And the other major downside is that if you have many customers, you'll spend all your time in focus groups and not doing product management. We also have focus groups with multiple customers. This type of engagement involves preparation of a presentation or at least a set of questions designed to lead a discussion. It's attended by various different customers all at one time, meaning that it has that added benefit of allowing different opinions to be voiced, which saves time for you as the product manager. Unfortunately, some customers believe that revealing their company's processes is akin to an IP breach, and therefore they can be reluctant to discuss in an open forum, especially if their competitors are present. This can result in an odd mixture where certain individuals' voices are heard louder than others, and some are not heard at all. Another way of eliciting requirements and feedback is through working with individual representatives from different customers. This approach allows for a tailored discussion and can reveal some detailed habits in the ways in which your users interact with the system. It can also be a great way to forge bonds with your users. The main downside here is selection. In speaking to only a few people, you may be missing the predominant school of thought or opinion on the topic in your customer base. As I mentioned, this is not an exhaustive list. All of these options have their own merits and strong points, and you may find that a mix of these works best for you. There is another approach that I've tried out and found relative success with, which I wanted to share with you all in a specific example. The scenario was that I was looking to change the way in which report workflows run in the system. And these reports are a key piece of documentation for a clinical trial, so the stakes are high. Because it's a controversial thing to change, I wanted to make sure I got as much feedback and opinion on the topic before making any changes in the system. So to start off with, my team and I collated a list of end users. Any end user that I had come across in my time or was known to account managers as willing to provide feedback, Their names and contact details were added to a central list. And this list is a living document, constantly being added to and updated. And I keep a record of every engagement and whether it was positively received and responded to or not. You can also use this document to help users decide how much engagement they want to have, which can also be key when you're dealing with users who are using the software for their work. You don't want to spam everybody with constant requests. I worked with the brilliant UX team at Medidata to create an interactive prototype. So this is a mock-up that you can click through in order to show the user journey how it would look once actually developed. Now, I used that interactive prototype to create a short demonstration video of about 3 minutes long. And in that video, I narrated what was happening in the system as I went along. It's important here for the demo to demonstrate that user journey, the happy path through the system, and what that would look like for a user. It's really easy to put together some slides describing a new feature or process, but I truly believe that it's key to present it from the perspective or the lens of the end user. I find that product videos can often be really keen to show off all of the functionality and every single capability that's there, and exactly what happens when you select each button on the page. However, I really suggest that you instead take an approach that puts yourself in the shoes of the end user. Come back to the persona analyses of your product. When I'm narrating these videos, I speak as if I am an end user. And to make this very clear to the viewers of the end of these videos, I will say, I will speak as if I am that end user. So for example, I might say something like, as a registered nurse, I access this screen to see an overview of all my patients and complete my ward round. Or to give an example from the clinical trial world, as a biostatistician, I select this button here to begin my review of the clinical trial site data. In this way, you marry the persona and the use case. This has the effect of bringing the feature home for these users because it means they can relate to what you're trying to show because you're actively mentioning the related persona and the action that they're trying to take. There's really no need to show what every button on the page does or show the failure scenarios and all of the edge cases. What you want is to clearly communicate how the happy path will work. And that's how you get your message across, because you're focusing on the value that the product provides. Once the video is ready, the next step is to then put together a survey with a list of specific questions about the implementation of the proposed feature. I use Google Forms. In my opinion, the best survey questions are the ones that can be answered conclusively. So those are the yes/no questions, and that's because you can really easily report on the outcomes. If you have questions that are open-ended, and of course these should always be asked when eliciting feedback from end users, these are much more difficult to report on, so you may want to also use the above methods of engagement in conjunction to the survey in these scenarios. I embedded the demonstration video into the top of the survey, instructing users to view the video first and then respond to the questions based on what they've seen. I then sent the survey link out to the users on the curated list, along with an email asking them to fill it in. The completion of the survey is designed to take no longer than 10 minutes for these users, meaning that it's a super fast, effective, and targeted way to elicit feedback. When I think of product surveys, what comes to mind are the surveys that get sent to me as an end user. And these surveys are usually quite predictable, and you may have had a similar experience. They'll have questions like, rate your satisfaction with product X, or would you recommend product X to a friend or colleague? These types of questions can give an indication of overall product satisfaction, but it's often not followed up to ask how that satisfaction could be increased or changed. So do think carefully about the wording of the questions that you add to these surveys, and make sure that the answers will meet the goals that you're trying to achieve and bring in the information that you need to gather. There are some considerable benefits to the approach of the video survey. First of all, it requires about 10 minutes of time from end users, which is a really big win, considering that these users are interacting with the system for their day job and they have work to do. They may not always be able to devote an hour or more to a focus group session. In addition, it allows these users to digest the issue at hand. They can watch the video and then take the time to gather their thoughts before responding. They can also use this time to consult with their colleagues and understand their peers' opinions first. So not only are there big benefits for the actual end user, the time that I spent putting this together was minimal in comparison to the work that goes into creating vast presentations and slide decks for focus groups. The UX team took a couple of days to come up with the prototype, and it took me about 5 minutes to record the demonstration video in QuickTime on a Mac. And I put together the questions and vetted the survey with internal stakeholders before sending it out. So the time input from my side was truly insubstantial. I gave respondents a week to send their surveys back in, and Google Forms has a great feature so I can track who has responded and who hasn't, so I knew who to chase up. My next step was to collate the responses and start analysing the data. The goal is to find a majority in each question to help provide a clear path on the way forward for the product. I assembled the responses in a Google Sheet. Google also has a super useful feature that does this for you automatically. I was able to review the responses, categorize them, and see very quickly and easily the sentiment of the various end users, and therefore, by extension, the direction that the product should go in. The next step that I recommend is to conduct a short and targeted focus group, with attendees being those people who completed the survey, as well as anyone else who is interested, of course. The idea here is to present the findings from the survey, all anonymized, and to present the responses and the direction that the respondents are leaning towards. And this is done really effectively through creating color-coded graphs and charts of the data. Here are some examples. Google Forms is great because it creates these charts for you automatically. But if you want some more sophisticated charts or analysis of the data, you can easily achieve this in a spreadsheet using things like pivot tables and editable charts. In these examples, you can see a pretty clear majority on these questions. Presenting this data analysis to end users is important because they can see the outcome of the survey for themselves. The next step is to present the updated approach that you'll take, which is aligned with the majority of the feedback, so that users can see what they will be getting based on the outcomes of the survey. The major impact that this has is end user buy-in. If they can see the evidence of the data-driven decision-making, that the changes aren't just arbitrary, that there is rhyme and reason to the changes that you're making to the application, then everyone is either on board or at the very least, they understand why a particular approach was taken. Through this method, you're also undertaking requirements of reconciliation. Now, this is a great way to handle a situation where, for example, client A wants one implementation and client B wants the opposite. So, to recap some of the benefits of the approach that I'm proposing. First of all, it's super fast. So it was really quick in terms of the time spent preparing the materials, the prototype, the survey, the email, a half-hour focus group session. It's also really fast for the client. It requires only 10 minutes time input per person, which is highly valuable. This approach is also wide-reaching. You can cast a wide net for your engagement. You can send the survey to as many people as you want at no extra cost. This means you can get a really wide range of input from a range of stakeholders. And then based on your analysis, if you want to, you can break down the data by customer or break it down by the type of user if you need to. This approach also incorporates data-driven decision-making and validated learning, which is really a key part of product management. In addition, it promotes buy-in and increased engagement from end users. So to recap all of this and to bring all of the loose ends together, here are some key takeaways. Product management in a B2B context can have some challenges when it comes to engaging end users, and regulated industries can have further constraints. Various types of engagements can work, but the engagement that requires minimal time investment from end users is ideal, specifically in this environment, because the end users are utilizing these applications in their day-to-day jobs. The video survey approach that I'm proposing can be really useful in driving end user engagement in the regulated B2B product space, whilst incorporating elements of requirements reconciliation, data analysis, and data-driven decision-making. My final thought on this topic is that this approach has the added benefit of compounding that end user engagement. Once these end users feel that they've been included in the process, that they've participated, and that they've been heard, and once they realize that they've actually been able to influence the product, then they're invested and they're motivated to continue engaging and continue providing their thoughts. So as a whole, this approach is particularly useful in the B2B environment and makes huge leaps in our search for the end user.